So I'm here with Jarf to discuss a new Argent Metal sample library you're coming up with, and some things about the Doom array and Argent Metal in general. So who are you, and why should people listen to you?
You shouldn't listen to me because I'm a crazy rocket scientist to start with. But if you do want to listen to me, you're going to have to bear with a lot of very annoying sounds, which get turned into very, very not annoying sounds and get put on playlists and loads of people listen to them. So that's why you shouldn't listen to me. Yeah, so I'm basically on here right now to just show you guys the new and revolutionary kind of approach in Argent Metal, and that's essentially to just bulk sound design before you go into doing any sorts of songs. And I'm going to actually suggest a video which is essentially a time lapse of me working on a song, basically using this product, and that's going to essentially show you guys the type of efficiency you can get to by using this thing, and how it's kind of a new step up in terms of creating Argent Metal. I studied aerospace. I have a master's in aerospace, which I've just graduated with, and now I'm going into the workplace. And what I've actually found is the number one most viable thing in terms of doing that and learning that is batch processing. So applying to, lots of sample packs, optimization, operations, and workflow. So I feel like I'm very good at spotting where things are and where they can be improved, and that makes me quite good at making products and essentially teaching people how they can improve the way they produce.
So what is Argent Metal in your own words?
Argent Metal is essentially industrial metal, which is derivative of Mick Gordon's take on the Doom 2016 soundtrack. And I say Doom 2016 because that's really where all the innovation came from. Of course, there were prototypes with the Wolfenstein soundtrack and a lot of the kind of things leading up to that with industrial sound design arrays, but there wasn't ever really a fusion of metal and electronic industrial music in a modern sense until Doom 2016.
Why has it taken us so long to decode the Doom 2016 soundtrack?
So a lot of the reason I actually find this is that when you go and watch those behind the Doom videos, you actually realize that there's a lot of mystification. It's kind of a 3-minute marketing pitch more than anything, kind of really good for the composing portfolio. For us producers, it's very hard to kind of discuss stuff in a way which is easy for the general public to understand. So therefore, a lot of these kind of things which have been said openly kind of spread these kind of misinformation ideas, despite the fact that Mick Gordon has essentially done tons of podcasts and tons of interviews and explained exactly what he does and has referenced all of his hardware. It's kind of mind-blowing to me that it's taken us this long, and I think a lot of that is because of a lot of misconceptions.
Well, can you help us break down some of Mick Gordon's approach here?
Yeah, so I believe that the Mick Gordon approach is actually very, very simple. It's effective sound design, not just like bulk sound design or in really good quality sound design, but effective sound design. Essentially what that means is creating something which you can use as a workflow to produce good, consistent results, anytime, anywhere, and always to the dot. And that's how we can handle something like the Doom Eternal soundtrack, which we found out was very, very stressful.
Yeah, that was a big debacle with a lot of drama. And we'll still never get a good quality copy of the Doom Eternal soundtrack, unfortunately. I don't think... I guess there's been some fan reproductions, but...
We've been working very hard at that, yes.
Yeah, I think that's another reason that the Doom 2016 soundtrack is important, is because we have an official version from Mick Gordon of that soundtrack. You can go listen to it on streaming platforms. Doom Eternal... no such thing.
I have to completely agree with you there, and that's why it's my favorite soundtrack, because I know this is the definitive vision, essentially, from the composer himself, and obviously that gets put out there, and it's likely he's getting revenue from it as well, so he really probably put his all into it, because if you've got a AAA marketing department behind you, you kind of want to put your all into it, because it's such a good opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know, I mean, I don't have any experience in game soundtrack design, but what he explained, there's all these little stems and parts of songs that are kind of almost like samples, but sections of songs that get stacked up based on the gameplay and how intense the gameplay is, and which is why it always feels like the soundtrack is so perfect in the game, because like when you're going at it, the soundtrack's going at it, and then when it chills out, like the soundtrack chills out, and that's awesome. But that is something that you can do. But then when you make a soundtrack from a game like that, you have to actually pick and choose sort of the song structure. It's not like a live performance, so it's a whole different ball game than normal songwriting.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it very much with my kind of engineer brain with like a systems diagram. So I've always developed these system diagrams for lots of different games, and a recent game I've worked on called Shadows Are Alive is a multiplayer game with a very, very similar system to Doom Eternal. You know, the demon pops up and there's scary orchestral music, basically. Obviously a different approach, but, you know, Mick Gordon, he is an expert in game audio integration as much as he is in developing the music itself.
Yeah, he is. And you've done some videos, I know, on some of his past, and sort of, you mentioned Wolfenstein. I think you did a video on that. Can you go into that a little bit on how he got here?
Yeah, so the Mick Gordon approach, as I like to call it, is essentially to go in and kind of wear as many hats as possible. So you're going to go in, you're going to do your kind of AAA soundtracks, you're going to network. You might start with something like SpongeBob. I think he started with some SpongeBob game or something, which is kind of crazy when you compare it to Doom. But, you know, he started with stuff like that, and then he built his way up, you know, as he increased his portfolio. And eventually he got to the point where he was working on stuff like Need for Speed, and then he's all of a sudden on like Australian national television. And then, you know, he gets involved with the Battlefield 3 trailers, and I think that's where a lot of the sound comes from, you know, if we go back and look at it chronologically. And then he obviously got to really widen out his metal approach with Killer Instinct, which is like this arcade fighting game kind of thing. If you haven't seen it, go and check out Killer Instinct right now. And then he's able to essentially do Wolfenstein. And it's all about the creative control. People have to trust you so that they can give you full creative control, so that when you want to deliver something which is, you know, different and revolutionary, as you could say, or maybe not revolutionary, but like the complete vision, when you want to do that, you have to ensure to people that, you know, you can be trusted with full creative control, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he definitely worked his way up through the ranks. And I think I played The New Order not long before Doom 2016. And just remember that it was an awesome soundtrack, especially like near the end, some of the boss battles. And then, of course, when Doom came out, you know, now Mick Gordon's a household name. You know, I think I had played a number of games that he had worked on before, but I never knew who he was until Doom. And that just really put him on the map as you know, possibly the best game soundtrack of all time. And in terms of its influence on metal and game soundtracks, I think it's up there in terms of how influential it has been, certainly.
It's almost like a prophecy, because the classic Doom games were very influential in terms of music as well, and people don't actually realize how influential they were because of the hardware limitations they were working with. So it's almost like there's this kind of spirit and legacy that goes into the Doom games, where whatever drops, you know, each reboot, it seems to do something pretty cool on its own kind of micro level.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And I was a big fan of the Doom soundtracks well before the new Doom games, so it did have a lot to live up to. And that first kind of opening in Doom 2016, when you go out onto Mars for the first time and they've got the new version of E1M1, it's like, okay, yeah, this is a bit of fan service, but I'm here for it. So so do you want to talk a little bit about his Doom instrument? And I guess if people aren't familiar with it, can you give a brief overview of the Doom array, what it is, and then you know, show us how it works?
Yeah, so the Doom instrument is essentially derived from sine waves and noise. Now, there's been a long debate about what sort of noise gets put in, but a lot of the time the sound which is produced best is a piece of noise being generated, and then it's normally amplitude modified, so essentially ring modulated for all the kind of music heads, and then that gets fed into this array with 4 separate channels. Now, of these channels, and I have a diagram I can pop up on screen, which I'm going to send across to Nick. there's a really distorted kind of crunchy channel, and what you're going to have on this one is a lot of bit crushers, wave shapers, kind of downsamplers, stuff which really gets that kind of crispy crunch kind of stuff. That's channel 1. Then what you're going to have is your echo channel. So the echo channel takes advantage of these beautiful things called tapes, and the hardware version obviously is going to have a lot more artifacting and a lot more kind of wow and flutter and all that nice stuff which you'd expect from a tape thing. But he also goes on about how there's some trogotronics in there for like this kind of compression sound, and I believe that he puts in a spring reverb. So if you've ever used a spring reverb, you know that you can just kind of pluck it, and it can produce all sorts of these weird sounds. I think we end up hearing some of that throughout the soundtrack, which is quite cool. And then your third channel, and these are all the main kind of big hardware channels, these first 3, is your phaser channel. So he actually reuses one of the pedals from the distortion array, and that's the Geiger counter. And the nice thing about the Geiger counter is it's very versatile. It's just like digital kind of downsampler, bit crusher distortion. Sounds really cool on guitars as well. So this thing is then being fed into a Geiger counter, and this phasing stuff goes on. So he's got this Mutron biphase, and he's got this like other phaser pedal. I can't quite remember what it is. But essentially what that does is it creates a lot of movement. And I want to add in another additional thing in regards to movement, and that's what I think we've heard a lot on the Eternal soundtrack, and that's essentially CV automation. So you're essentially putting a signal in, and it's plugging an envelope through, and that actually kind of adds on where the phases are. So that's something else to experiment with. And then finally, the final chapter did actually buy one of these because I wanted to reference it, and that's essentially the actual little mini amp which he uses with the feedback. So obviously what you do then is you'd grab your audio interface and you'd run a signal into this through your audio interface, and you'd loop it back around using routing in your DAW, and that's probably how you can get the lowest latency setup, which works with a digital version. Or if you have the hardware, you can run it at 0 latency all the time. That's essentially the sound. And it's pretty cool what you can end up with, especially with some of those feedback loops and a lot of the stuff you can generate, even just moving the different types of channels around, because they've all got this really distinct sound.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, you may not know, but do you think he was running the sounds through all 4 channels, like with a splitter simultaneously, recording them all simultaneously and trying to do, because he's got all these pedals, and so a lot of the automation is just him physically changing the knobs on the pedals live. And of course, he can do multiple takes. But I was always been curious about sort of what his workflow looked like. And also if he was just making sounds like out of nowhere, like this is a cool sound and I know I'm going to go with this rhythm for this song. Or did he have more of the song in place before he was doing that?
I think with his experience doing electronic music and obviously working to deadlines, he's probably quite a fan of resampling stuff. So this is kind of where the vision for Argent Shotz comes in, where basically you're going to create a load of interesting sounds, and then you're going to chop it up and pitch it up and down and do different notes with it later. However, and I have noticed this a lot on especially the Eternal soundtrack, he's done a lot more of kind of automation stuff. So I think just based on what I was seeing on the screen when he was kind of showing us his stuff during the Behind the Doom videos, and also watching the GDC talk over again, it's actually a mix of both. So when you have these kind of build-up sections, he'll definitely just go in and make the rhythm with the array and use a lot of automation. And essentially what's going to happen there is you've got like all these CV inputs firing around to like obviously change the individual stuff, and a lot of these kind of envelopes, there's a lot of filters in there being fired off with CV stuff and obviously the phases and stuff. But on another level, because you have these 3 distinct channels and also this feedback loop, that's a big one. You can imagine modifying the gain into a feedback loop. That would all change dynamically. And how does he do this? He does this by actually putting a compressor at the end of each of these channels and running literally just a sine wave into it through a sidechain if he wants to duck it down. And this is essentially the hardware way to do it. In digital, we can just mess with the sliders, which is very nice. But if you want to get a more authentic kind of curve and that kind of slappy sound from the compressors, you can also do that if you want to set it up that way. So that obviously then gets slammed into what I believe is a Pultec EQ, and then kind of put into a 116 style FET compressor, and that gives the kind of meshing together of it all So yeah, it's really a combined approach. He uses a lot of one shots from what I've heard, because you can hear that there's a lot of kind of just stabs and stuff, like those kind of moments where it's very brief and it kind of all unfolds and it's very thick. And normally the thick parts are the parts which are sampled, and then the parts which are like more kind of subtle and automated and building up and creating that feeling of movement, those tend to be punched in. Those are kind of like the loops. And I imagine if you had something like the classic Doom MIDI or a classic like loop for something, anything, a guitar riff, a simple guitar riff. I think this is why we hear so many simple guitar riffs, is because, you've got to generate ideas off it. And what the Doom Array does is it fills in the gaps in the rhythm very, very well. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, can you you have sort of a virtual recreation of the Doom Array. And I've also always been curious as to just how much of this array, because it's very complicated and there's a lot of things. And when it's explained, usually people go through, okay, you need this compressor and this one and that one, all these different distortions and all these different echoes. It's like, how much of that is really necessary? Because when you're getting 4 or 5 distortion pedals deep, like, I know they're all slightly different, but I wonder, could you even make a more minimalist sort of array that had a similar sound?
I've heard people do it, and they've shown me them. And what I say to people is, stop thinking about the result and always think about the process. The process is what matters. You change the process, you change the outcome. That was the main line from the GDC talk in Doom 2016. You can make this thing for free, or you can go as expensive as you want. Or you could really strip it down and just decide, I'm going to only buy 1 or 2 of these pedals, and then I'm just going to fix it in post. But what matters is the way I kind of simplify it on this diagram: distortion, echo, phaser, feedback. That'll get you the authentic sound. Whichever means you decide to do that through is your choice, and you can do it with free plugins, you can do it with guitar pedals, or you can do it with the actual hardware units. Good luck doing that, by the way. You're looking at something like 20 grand.
Wow.
So, I've done a lot of research into it, and what I really kind of want to do is bring that research to the bedroom producer and, the amateur composer and even the high-level composer, and put it in a way which is accessible to them.
Cool. Well, can you show us some examples of what you're working on?
Yeah, so essentially what I can do here is just bring open my door, and what I'm working on at the moment is a set of samples. So what we're going to look at is essentially a load of one-shot sounds which are generated from this virtual Doom array. And as you can see, D, E, P, bus, amp. So I'm not going to run the feedback because I'll annoy everyone in my house right now. But, there's the channels, and this is what we're working with. And what we can do is we can create a load of sounds from this. So if I go to where I've got this stored, you can see if I bring this up that I've essentially got a load of these files, and there's a few different ones, different notes, obviously pitched for different effect. So what's going to happen is I'm going to take this and I'm going to basically drop it into a sampler, and it would not find it. There we are. I'm going to drop this into a sampler, and then I'm going to just set the key, and it's plug and play. So this is already a pre-existing kind of sample. So now we need to think about how we can generate that sample. Obviously, you can manipulate this, you can make it go in reverse. That sounds pretty similar to some stuff. Let's look over here, see what it's doing. You can generate this with any synth, by the way. This methodology, this kind of workflow, you can generate that with any synth you like. It's really just about the resampling. When we think about the Doom array, we need to think about what we're putting into it. So what we're going to do with the Doom array is we're going to actually start with our patch. And I have this available for free for people. It's just a phase plant preset. And it's, again, just a sine wave, just some noise, And what we're going to basically do is really think about how you're going to control the mix of the two. So if I go over here and I play Phase Plant, and I've got this routed into my channels, play a nice sine wave down there. So I've got this bound to my mod wheel. The noise is bound to my mod wheel. So we can play with that a bit. And you can hear the kind of blend between that. And then I can change the gain around. So another thing I like to do is to play around with these input parameters as well. So we've got noise, we've got the sine wave, but we've got things like the noise slope. How harsh is your noise? How much decay is on your punch? So do you want it more like a kick? That's going to produce a lot of these kind of echo artifacts. Or do you want more of a release, like a drone? Something smooth. And then something I do to overdrive this is to actually knock back the sine wave and increase the noise, and this creates these really cool, really crunchy sounds. So that's what you're starting with, essentially. And then what you're going to do from there is run it into these channels. So what we're looking at here is probably the most accurate virtual version of the hardware. When I say most accurate, I mean effects, not trying to exactly match it, but trying to match it in terms of what it does. What the plugins are going to essentially do in the process is kind of modulate that signal and apply these mathematical functions, which are basically going to always be the same. You can't really change this. They're trying to achieve a certain effect. There'll be little imperfections, but we're not really concerned about loads of those because we're stacking so many effects on this thing anyway. Or not many effects if you want to do a simplified version. So what we're going to use is some transistor op-amp distortion. This is, an emulation kind of the, I believe it's the 432K distortion box, which he names. And then what we're going to do after that on this distortion channel is essentially use a virtual recreation, which I've made, of the KV100, and this is basically just input, ring mod, filter, all that good stuff, kind of nice UI to make it look a bit similar. Tactical Nuke, this is a Geiger counter. It has Mick Gordon presets. We're going to do a fuzz, any fuzz. I'm going to upgrade this fuzz. I just use a Bias Effects fuzz modeler, and that's all good and cool. Echo Cat. This is an emulation of the same kind of echo thing he uses. Again, quite cheap to get. You can get this in a bundle from Waves Factory. They do brilliant products. And tube stuff. He uses a lot of tubes, a lot of Trogotronics. And obviously, and this is probably most crucial to the echo sound, is a really nice cassette emulation where you can change this around and just decide which quality you want. Because you can probably imagine he's sitting there in the studio switching out these tapes because he's a production nerd. He knows what these different tapes sound like. And if you look at some of his work on Routine, you'll see that he's actually using EMF recordings of different tape stop and start stuff. So it's really kind of intricate and really cool. So our phaser channel, you can pretty much do anything you like with this. What matters is you just do a distortion into a phaser. And, that's the cool thing. This is kind of like a Mutron biphase, but I don't really think it's the best emulation. Then you're going to slam that all together with that amp feedback into something which looks like this. And, the compressor should probably look like this if it's a FET style compressor. And everything after that is pretty much just post-processing or whatever you like to do. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of the chain. Let's look at how some of the actual modifications of these specific pedals, like if pedals that really affect stuff, can affect the sound.
Yeah, like I know the Geiger counter and the KV100 are pretty unique to this setup.
Yeah. The main thing I'd say, which you want to edit here, is this one. And this is why I spent so long creating a nice free reactor module for it, because I could not get the sound the way I wanted it to.
That would be fun to map that out to some physical knobs too.
I've already done it. I've got a keyboard sitting in front of me ready to do that.
Good.
It's a lot of fun.
And then the tactical nuke.
Oh, go on. Tactical nuke. Yeah, this thing's brilliant. I'm actually just going to solo the distortion channel for this. So that's kind of something you'd expect to hear on like Wolfenstein or something. Let's mix the other two in a bit.
Can you bring the plug-in into the center?
Here we are. Pin that. So yeah, that's Tactical Nuke. It's brilliant madness.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I'm gonna have to probably buy that one at some point.
It's a good price as well.
Can you talk about your sampling and the whole purpose of your Argent Shotz and how that's going to work with people's workflow?
So the way I like to explain how Argent Shotz fits into the workflow is you can sit down, you can plug away at this array, and you can do all these things to tweak it. But the problem is, it's like an instrument. It's described as an instrument, and you play it like an instrument. So you're not going to be good at it straight away. What I recommend people doing is just going in and creating a load of kind of mud pie kind of stuff, but always keep track of which key you're using and essentially what kind of characteristic it has. So the way Argent Shotz is going to fit in is essentially it's a load of pre-made stuff using very, very authentic versions of the Doom Array sound, and you can basically just go in, you can plug in a rhythm, and you can just get going with the sound, and you don't have to worry about the setup, your CPU, or buying loads of plugins to directly match the sound, because, you know, everyone's got a bit of fear of rejection, so kind of outsourcing that can really help to get songs done quickly and to a deadline, and even just take inspiration for your own Doom arrays if you want to. Like, I'm not saying this thing should be what you should always use. I'm going to price it at a very low kind of price, and people are going to find it very accessible. I always want this to be more of an educational tool than an actual product, more than anything. What I find is a really good rhythm is just kind of dotted notes, just stacked, and then you can get like a... And we had a bit of variation there. These are all recorded at 120 BPM, so I'm just going to adjust the BPM. Let's try a different sample, because I find a lot of the time you can really get to know this thing by just trying a lot of different stuff. And it's not always going to be the right sample for the right purpose. Bear with me. This is quite a hard thing to do. I should have prepped something.
Yeah.
In theory, but I did not think it through enough. And this actually highlights one of the reasons why I did this. So I actually made a load of loops, which are completely free to use, and you have all the layers to do, in case you end up actually having a bit of creative block. So somehow I've managed to preempt me getting creative block, which is quite fun. So if you just grab this thing in here, and it's normally the bus stuff is everything which is bust together, you can actually just drop a loop in. And the good thing about this is that I've given multiple variations, so you kind of have a lot of these sounds, but in different intensity levels. That's V2. Let's have a look at kind of V3. That's getting more towards a kind of plug and play kind of thing. I just really wanted to exaggerate the different levels of intensity and build up you can get with a lot of these loops.
Yeah, when I was looking through the samples myself, that definitely stood out to me, is those loops and the fact that you did include the multiple variations on them. And I thought, yeah, it would be very easy to throw together a song using those kind of as a basis, and then you've got a lot of other one shots in there that you can, easily incorporate around that for extra effects and swells and stuff like that. So I think the loops is a really good idea, and that kind of, because it not only takes the production side out of the equation, but also a little bit into the writing side, and yet they're not. I mean, you could make a million different songs off of those loops and they wouldn't be the same songs, but just having those rhythms, because a lot of what Mick Gordon is doing is using basic rhythms, and they're more or less atonal, and every song kind of has a motif of a rhythm, and then the guitars usually do the melody or like a lead synth patch, so those kind of background rhythmic loops are sort of the stage for everything else, and it's a cool thing to have in there.
I think a lot of it is you're going to be in a lot of different situations where you need to be really versatile, and I think the main key is having the right tools for each one of those situations, because sometimes you can sit down and really kind of plug and put in these individual little samples and kind of build this nice thing up. Maybe you're doing some interplay with the guitars, and maybe you're doing some nice synth lines, maybe even orchestral lines or something. Like I've been doing a lot of that recently, kind of blended stuff. Maybe you're doing that and you're kind of really thinking about how these little sound design bits can be put in. Alternatively, maybe you just want to throw a loop in and have that as a bridge section by itself because you're in a pinch and you need to get this thing out for later tonight, or else a publisher's going to get mad at you, or your manager's going to get mad at you, or maybe you just feel like you spent way too long on a song and you just really need to get it out there and you're kind of pressing with your time. That's also very useful. And I think a lot of the point about this and a lot of the feedback I've been getting is that people really kind of appreciate what you can get with that. And it's really about thinking of the workflow and the usability, and essentially how you can optimize your time in a way which still produces those great results. And what I've essentially done here for people is done multiple days of just plugging away and creating interesting sounds, interesting loops, and giving all the source material for that to then basically go and create your own things. I've done a massive sound design session for people so they can just go away and play with it and learn what the sound is, what Argent is, and kind of think about how they can really develop their own sound as much as incorporate this sound into their own music.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to go about it. Can you talk a little bit about what Argent Shotz 2 is going to be like in terms of pricing? Where can people get it? Do you have a release time frame?
I get quite busy with a lot of the jobs I'm doing at the moment. So the release time frame, I'm looking at sometime either directly before or directly after the release of Doom: The Dark Ages. Coming up to that is probably going to be when I start really accelerating this thing, because I want to take advantage of the fact that everyone's interested in Doom again all of a sudden. And, you know, I've been speaking to a few people about what they think the soundtrack's going to be like, and they reckon they're going to do something different, which will be very, very interesting. So I'm going to really try and coincide it with that, and the kind of degree to which it's going to get sat on and worked on and tested is going to determine, you know, the result of the end product. But this isn't the end all be all. I think if I really feel like I want to, I'll push the thing back and work on it some more, because I want to develop these contact libraries and something I'm going to call the Vega suite, where basically you have these one-shots, but I'll have separated the actual distortion, echo, and phaser channel with variations, so you can mix and swap your own ones, like how I was playing around with Tactical Nuke and the reactor module, to basically then create these really interesting and varied sounds. I'm going to incorporate something like that in some sort of contact library, and we can probably expect this on a good spree within the next month, and definitely before Christmas. That's essentially where I'm seeing this thing getting released. There's an alpha version out right now, which is essentially all the stuff without the contact libraries, and kind of the tester version, which I've done to give out to people to see what they actually think of the product. And that's already there. That's £5, so about $7-ish at the moment. And the full one is going to be £15. So it's going to be a load of contact libraries and very accessible for anyone who wants to really kind of get at it. Obviously, it's not underpriced, because I don't want people to perceive the value as low, because, you know, I get enough use out of this in my own music, but it's not going to ever be something like £100 or I guess like $150. I think that's just far, far too much for a load of samples.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, sample libraries, you know, unless it's a full-on instrument, these kind of bundles of samples and one-shots, it's good to be on the more affordable side. And, you know, a lot of people just collect stuff like that and may never even use it. So hopefully not, though, because I think it's a unique library. There isn't a whole lot else on the market that is in this vein. That's really like Argent focused that I've seen. So, and especially from somebody who actually has the experience in this genre to know what you're talking about.
And the other fun thing is I'm going to include a PDF of my process, how I came up with it. I'm going to do some like nice stamps and stuff, make it visually appealing, make it easy to read. And that's essentially my plan with it. I don't want people to think that this is some sort of attempt to just make money. This is far more than that. This is essentially me trying to supercharge the Argent community, as I could say, because my plan really is to then pump everything I make back into just marketing it and trying to get the message out there about people creating Argent music and making it more accessible, as I've said before.
Yeah, and if it's successful, I'm sure you could do a version 3 and 4 and so on. So there's a built-in continuation on the idea if this works.
Maybe
out.
A 2.5 if it does really well, and then a 3 after that.
Yeah. Where can people follow you?
Follow me on YouTube. I have a community Discord. I have my own Discord as well, which is just my own stuff. But mainly this Discord called New Industrial Metalcore, which I'll give out an invite to. There's a lot of very, very cool artists in there. And apart from that, Spotify, basically. All these product demos and everything using this is just going to be on my Spotify page, and I'm quite a man of singular focus, so music is really where it's at for me. Yeah, I'm actually going to be holding a competition in the community Discord server, where essentially we're going to bury a load of audio Easter eggs in our music, and we're actually going to be assessing it based on the best song, which is produced from this, using at least 2 methods for hiding audio Easter eggs, and also the best incorporation of Easter eggs, like the most creative Easter eggs we can find, and that's going to be in this server. And you know, I'm going to run a lot of these kind of community events. Argent Shotz might play a part of that. Maybe I'll do like the best demo song for it or something, and there will be prizes, and there will be like shout outs, and there'll be all that stuff which will really kind of get you going as an artist and kind of motivate you to do stuff.
Very cool. That sounds like a fun contest. I think if you
subscribe
want to
Nick.
Yeah, subscribe to me.
There's awesome content, and eat more meat.
True. Eat lots of
essentially.
meat.
Eat a lot of meat.
Yes.
It's brilliant.
Definitely. Yeah. Are you on a carnivore diet or?
Funny story actually. I did the carnivore diet basically to improve my mental capabilities while I was doing the aerospace degree.